Welcome to another episode of History of the Popes, where we delve into the rich tapestry of the early Church, exploring not just the figures who occupied the See of Peter, but the profound cultural, theological, and social currents that shaped their ministries. Today we turn our attention to a pontiff whose legacy, though shrouded in the mists of antiquity, offers a poignant glimpse into the fragile yet resilient dawn of Christianity in Rome, Pope Evaristus. As we embark on this journey, let us remember that the history of the popes in these earliest centuries is less a chronicle of dates and decrees than a meditation on fidelity amid uncertainty, on the quiet heroism of those who shepherded a fledgling community through shadows of persecution and the stirrings of institutional form. To grasp Evaristus's place in the papal succession, we must first step back into the turbulent world of the late 1st century. The Church in Rome, born in the shadow of the apostles Peter and Paul, both martyred under Nero in the 60s, had endured waves of suspicion and sporadic violence. By the time Evaristus emerges onto the historical stage around the year 99 or 100, the empire had passed from the paranoia of Domitian to the relative stability of Nerva and then Trajan. Yet, stability for Rome did not mean solace for Christians. The famous correspondence between Pliny the Younger, governor of Bithynia, and Emperor Trajan around 112, written just after Evaristus's likely death, reveals the empire's pragmatic but perilous approach. Christians were not to be hunted, but if accused and unyielding, they must perish. In this milieu, the Bishop of Rome was no throned monarch, but a pastor in hiding, a coordinator of house churches scattered across the city's hills, navigating the delicate balance between Jewish roots and emerging Gentile universality. The sources for Evaristus are sparse, as one might expect from an era when Christian writings were oral traditions or fragile papyrus scraps, often lost to fire, flood, or the flames of martyrdom. Our primary witnesses are Eusebius of Caesarea, the 4th century historian whose ecclesiastical history draws on earlier lists, and the Liber Pontificalis, that 8th century compilation of papal biographies laced with legend, yet rooted in genuine memory. Irenaeus of Lyons, writing against heresies in the late 2nd century, offers a simple enumeration. After Peter, Linus, Anacletus, and Clement comes Evaristus. Modern scholars quibble over the numbering. Some count him as the 4th successor, others the 5th, because the early pope was not yet a singular monarch, but the presiding voice among a college of presbyters, a primus inter pares in a communal episcopate. This fluidity, far from a flaw, reflects the Church's organic growth, adapting the Jewish synagogue model to the needs of a diaspora faith. Tradition paints Evaristus as a man of the margins, born perhaps in Antioch or Bethlehem to a Hellenized Jewish father named Judah. The Liber Pontificalis, ever vivid in its vignettes, calls him a Greek by birth, son of a Jew from the city of David's nativity. Whether this is precise biography or symbolic typology, linking the shepherd of Rome to the Good Shepherd's own birthplace, we cannot say, but it underscores a vital truth. The early Roman Church was a bridge community, woven from Jewish exiles fleeing Jerusalem's destruction in 70 and Gentile converts, drawn by the apostles' witness. Evaristus then embodies that hybrid vigor, a figure whose very existence challenges any tidy narrative of Christianity's parting of the ways from Judaism. He would have known the synagogues of Trastevere or the Subura, where Torah scrolls mingled with nascent Eucharistic prayers, and where debates over circumcision or Sabbath observance echoed the councils of Jerusalem. Ascending to leadership around the turn of the century, during Trajan's third year, Evaristus inherited a flock numbering perhaps a few thousand amid Rome's million souls. His predecessor Clement I, author of that stirring letter to the Corinthians urging unity, had modelled episcopal authority as fraternal exhortation rather than imperial fiat. Evaristus, in turn, seems to have turned his energies toward structure, a pastoral pragmatism born of necessity. The Liber Pontificalis credits him with dividing the city into titles, those ancient house churches or tituli that would evolve into parishes, and assigning a priest to each. Picture it, the sprawling urbs, with its 14 Augustan regions, now etched with invisible boundaries of faith. Not grand cathedrals, but cramped insulae and villa gardens where families gathered for the breaking of bread. This was no bureaucratic reform, but a sacramental strategy, ensuring that the bishop's oversight reached every corner, that baptism and Eucharist were not sporadic events, but woven into the daily rhythm of urban life. Moreover, tradition holds that Evaristus ordained 7 deacons for the city, echoing the apostolic appointment in Acts 6, those servants tasked with distributing alms so the apostles could devote themselves to prayer and the word. Here, too, we see continuity. Deacons as the church's social arm, bridging the altar and the alley, authentic witnesses to the bishop's charity. In 3 December ordinations, he is said to have elevated 6 priests, 2 deacons, and 5 bishops for distant sees, perhaps Antioch or Alexandria, fortifying the web of communion across the Mediterranean. These acts, if historical, mark Evaristus as an architect of collegiality, laying subtle foundations for what would become the College of Cardinals, that advisory body of Roman clergy who centuries later would elect popes. Yet we must tread lightly. The Liber Pontificalis, compiled in an age of Carolingian pomp, projects later hierarchies backward, romanticizing these early overseers as proto-princes of the Church. In truth, Evaristus's decrees were likely communal decisions, guided by the Spirit amid shared meals and whispered counsels. What of his teaching? The silence here is telling, for in an era before dogmatic treatises, the Pope's voice was the liturgy itself. One later tradition, echoed in medieval canonists, attributes to Evaristus a decree on marriage, that unions be celebrated publicly with priestly blessing in accord with apostolic custom. Whether he authored it or not, this speaks to a deepening sacramental consciousness. Marriage, once a civil contract laced with pagan auguries, now claimed Christ's sanctifying grace. A quiet revolution against the empire's libertine ethos, affirming the family as domestic church amid Rome's brothels and amphitheatres, where gladiatorial blood mingled with erotic frescoes. Such a stance was countercultural, a bulwark for Christian identity. And then there is the shadow of John the Apostle. Eusebius notes that the beloved disciple likely breathed his last in Ephesus during Evaristus's tenure, around 100. Imagine the ripple, the last living link to the upper room, to Gethsemane's agony, passing into eternity just as this unheralded Roman bishop takes the reins. Did word reach Rome's catacombs? Did Evaristus mourn, or draw strength from the Johannine charge to feed my sheep? In a church still reeling from apostolic loss, his pontificate becomes a hinge moment, shifting from eyewitness testimony to faithful transmission, the great work of tradition that Irenaeus would soon defend against Gnostic novelties. Of course, no early papal vita is complete without the crimson thread of martyrdom. The Liber Pontificalis crowns Evaristus with that laurel, claiming he was buried near Peter's tomb in the Vatican on October 25, 108, after 8 or 9 years of service. His feast, observed on October 26th in the Roman Martyrology, honours him sans explicit martyr's title, a nod to historical caution. Modern historians demur. Trajan's reign, unlike Domitian's, saw no systematic purge, only ad hoc executions for obstinacy. If Evaristus died violently, perhaps in the backlash against Ignatius of Antioch's execution in 107, it was not the spectacle of arena lions, but a quieter shedding of blood in cell or forum. Yet the tradition persists, for in the early church, every bishop's life was a martyrdom of sorts, daily dying to self amid betrayal, heresy, and imperial scorn. Evaristus's reputed resting place, now under the basilica's high altar, binds him eternally to Peter, the rock on which this improbable edifice was built, as his successor Alexander I would soon face. The church, under Evaristus, was no static institution but a living organism, pulsing with the gospel's leaven. His era bridges the apostolic age and the age of apologetics, when Justin Martyr would soon pen defences in Greek salons. Theologically, it whispers of enculturation, how the word made flesh took root in toga and tunica, synagogue and forum. Culturally, it evokes Rome's polyglot chaos, the Greek East meeting Latin West, Jew and Gentile at one table. And spiritually, it invites us to ponder the quiet saints, those whose names we etch in gold, not for exploits, but for endurance. In reflecting on Evaristus, we confront the paradox of papal history. The See of Pater, exalted in Vatican splendor, began in obscurity, its holders more akin to Isaiah's suffering servant than Augustus's imperator. He reminds us that authority in the church is not domination but diakonia, service, from the Greek for dust, traversing the gritty streets to bind wounds unseen. In our own fractured age with ecclesial divides and secular tempests, Evaristus calls us back to basics, organize not for power but for service, ordain not for prestige but for proclamation, live not for the individualized self but for the Lord who calls us to communion by means of community. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there in their midst. And so, as we conclude this episode, let us pause in gratitude for Pope Evaristus, that shadowy successor whose light, though faint in the sources, burns steady in the communion of saints. May his intercession strengthen us to build bridges where walls loom, to bless unions in a world of fleeting bonds, and to witness faithfully, even when history forgets to footnote our names. Join us next time as we explore another chapter in this grand narrative. Until then, peace be with you.